this video, you will learn how to set up and conduct sensory analysis. This is an example of a sensory analysis room. Because this is a food-safe environment, outside lab coats should not be worn in here. The food samples are prepared in the kitchen, which is separated from the tasting area. This is the training area where panelists are calibrated in a way like machines would be, and they are taught how to precisely and accurately recognize certain characteristics when performing sensory analysis. These are the individual booths where panelists evaluate the foods. The booths come with normal lighting as well as red lighting to mask the differences in color between samples. A typical tray setup for panelists include a napkin, utensils if required, a cup of water, some crackers for cleansing the palate, food samples of equal volume in individual serving containers, and last but most importantly, the sensory analysis questionnaire along with a pen. The serving containers should be labeled with random 3-digit codes. This is to keep the samples anonymous and prevent bias when panelists evaluate the samples. It's also important to ensure that all samples are the same temperature, or it may affect the sensory results from the panelists. To serve the panelists, server would bring trays from the kitchen to the booth by sliding the tray through the small door in the wall. There are 3 types of sensory analysis: discriminative, descriptive, and affective analysis. For the time point where each of the different sensory tests appear in the video, please refer to the description box below. Discriminative tests are qualitative, and they are used to determine whether panelists are able to tell the difference between samples. For example, these tests are often used when performing quality control on a new batch of food to ensure that this batch has no sensory differences from the control. In this video, we will demonstrate how to set up the following discriminative sensory analysis, which includes triangle test, pair comparison test, and dual trio test. Here is an example of how a triangle test is set up. 3 samples will be used where 2 are the same and 1 is different. The questionnaire tells the panelists that 2 of the 3 samples are identical and asks the panelists to identify the sample that is different. The order of tasting is also indicated on the question. Descriptive sensory tests are quantitative, and they are used to determine how samples differ from each other based on specific criteria. The descriptive sensory analysis that will be explored in this video include line scale, category scale, and ratio scale. Line scales are also known as unstructured scales. It's typically a horizontal 15 cm long line with anchor points 1.5 cm from each end. It also comes with an optional middle anchor point. A separate line scale is required for each attribute being tested. The anchor points are often accompanied by numbers and/or descriptive words. The panelists can indicate their score by marking a vertical line anywhere along the line scale where it reflects their evaluation of the sample. The markings on the line scale can then be measured and translated into numbers for statistical analysis. Affective tests, also known as hedonic tests, are used to measure consumer preference, liking, or acceptance of a product. We will discuss the most frequently used affective tests, which include pair comparison preference, hedonic scaling, and ranking. The pair comparison preference test is very similar to the pair comparison test in discriminative analysis. However, instead of identifying the difference between 2 samples in a certain attribute, pair comparison preference asks for panelist preference between the samples. Here is an example questionnaire. The hedonic scaling test is typically used to measure the degree of liking of a sample by consumers. This scale is very similar to the category scale as it includes a series of statements which allows the panelists to express a varying degree of preference for the sample. The scale can be converted numerically and subsequently analyzed through statistical analysis. Here is an example of the questionnaire. The samples are in random 3-digit codes and presented in randomized order to the panelists. The ranking test is very similar to the Friedman ranking test in discriminative analysis. However, instead of ranking the samples in a certain attribute, the ranking test here asks the panelists to rank their preference of the samples. Here is an example of the questionnaire used. This concludes the 3 different types of sensory analysis. Thank you for watching.